Good morning. How's everybody doing? Great. This is like a candy store for me. It was hard to just walk through, but I guarantee everything I've bought at REI I still own and still works, so holding on, it's durable. Hi, I'm David Stitzhal. I'm president of Full Circle Environmental, and I've been providing consultant support along with Julie Kohlauer, Aaron Colley-Morse, and Colette Marion of C+C to King County and City of Seattle's clothing waste prevention efforts. And that's being led by Chris Beatty and Liz Ficus, who are right up here. And I'd be happy to talk about our project as well. So let's see, is this working? Great. So my three-piece suit today is going to cover first a high-level overview of apparel and textiles impact on the waste stream, then a quick journey through King County and City of Seattle's Thread Cycle program to address end-of-life clothing and textiles, and then finally a spotlight on our recent work on clothing waste prevention. So we're going to jump right into, first, the impact of textiles on the waste stream. Spoiler alert, the size is extra large. You probably already knew that. It's a little clothing joke if you're not awake yet. We'll begin our high-level overview with a global perspective, and then I'm going to drop down a size to national, and then local, and then local snapshots. So let's begin with what I would call the mind-numbing climate connections. Polyester production for textiles in 2015, 706 billion kilograms of greenhouse gases, or the annual emissions of 185 coal-fired power plants, to put it in perspective. Apparel and footwear industries currently account for 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions, nearly as much as the entire European Union. And by 2030, the climate impact of the apparel industry alone is forecast to nearly match today's annual U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, and that's 4.9 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent. To keep giving some of the facts and figures, is this working here? Great. It takes 2,700 liters of water to make one cotton shirt, perhaps the one some of us are wearing here today, and that's the amount one person drinks in 2.5 years, and that's the life cycle water impact, by the way. 3,000 or about 3,800 liters of water are used over the full lifetime of a pair of Levi's 501 jeans. Now, according to the EPA Office of Solid Waste, Americans throw away more than 68 pounds of clothing and textiles per person per year, and consequently, the clothing and other textiles represent, interestingly, about 4% of the municipal solid waste stream. Often we hear things like diapers make up 2%, and it seems like so many things make up 2%. Textiles is even larger, 4%. And we'll come back to that number in a minute. US EPA has noticed that textiles increased 71% in the municipal waste stream from 2000 to 2014. And that growth is more than twice that of any other major waste category. Everybody dance break! So dropping down now to the local level, maybe I was going to try to sing along with that, but too much improv, not enough coffee. Locally, there's about 36,000 tons of textiles in King County and Seattle combined, so that's bringing it home now. In the municipal waste stream. And interestingly, that's about 4% of material here disposed by weight. So that matches the EPA national figure. And EPA studies further revealed that over the time period of 2000 to 2014, textile diversion, and that's through both reuse and recycling, remained stagnant at around 15%. So given the United States' heavy reliance on export markets for used textiles, pressure caused by constriction on the receiving end could drive our diversion rates even lower. If they're not taking it, we don't get to divert it. So that means U.S. thrifts won't have a key market for moving their donations into possible reuse. So, in 2014, King County initiated research to determine how to divert more textiles out of the waste stream. And they're searching for new or existing markets. And what they found was that there was already an active market taking not only the gently used items, but also the ripped, worn-out clothes, shoes, and linens. Bring me you're tired, you're poor, you're hungry. So the big thrifts were accepting these items and selling them to brokers to be downcycled into industrial wiping rags, insulation, and other products. but few consumers knew that they were able to take such worn-out items to the thrifts. So in response to that, beginning in 2015, King County teamed up with 9 of the area's largest collectors and created ThreadCycle. It's a public outreach campaign to encourage residents to divert damaged and unwanted textiles from the waste stream by donating them to the participating organizations. These organizations included, as you'll see, thrift stores, charities, as well as for-profit businesses. And based on a 2017 campaign survey, partners have started to see an uptick in the collection of damaged textiles. And that's perhaps as a result of the ThreadCycle campaign. However, ThreadCycle did have its limitations. According to the Council on Textile Recycling, only about 10 to 20% of donated items are resold locally by retailers and charitable organizations. A large portion of secondhand clothing is, as you might expect, exported to developing regions such as sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and also Eastern Europe. And furthermore, the number of countries that are limiting the import of used clothing, which comes primarily from the West, through bans or increased regulation, has more than doubled since 2014. So from 30 to 66 in 2016 have put up some sort of restriction on the import. And the opposition, it stems from negative impacts on these imports on the local economies. So that might be undercutting local textile production and apparel manufacturing and repair. Interestingly, some people have pointed to the recent parallels in the import of low-grade recyclables from the West through China's national sword policies. So I thought that was an interesting parallel to draw. And these shifting conditions do increase uncertainty about international markets for used clothes. So now we're going to switch from all of that kind of end-of-life stuff to the new clothing side. China has emerged as the largest exporter of high-volume, low-cost fashion, accounting for a staggering 30% of world apparel exports. And this flow floods the market, the global market, with available clothing. Some reports note that it's actually less expensive in many African markets to buy new clothes from China than it is to buy used clothes imported from the U.S. thrift market. And Americans, for our part annually, we buy 1 billion garments made in China alone. That's 4 pieces of clothing for every American human. And that doesn't even include all the other clothing that we buy from other nations. So clearly, recycling and reuse through thrift isn't enough. And reliance on the ability to continually export all of our items has its own risks. And King County and Seattle recognize there's actually another force out there that could undermine recycling and reuse tied to thrift, and that's fast fashion. So that term, you've probably all heard it. It's used to describe fashion industry's ever-accelerating pace of releasing new styles at low cost. And Huffington Post has a great quote. At one time, there were 2 fashion seasons, spring, summer, and fall, winter. By 2014, the fashion industry was churning out 52 micro-seasons per year. With new trends coming out every week, the goal of fast fashion is for consumers to buy as many garments as possible, as quickly as possible. End quote. So the costs of fast fashion are gaining increased media attention, and they represent an opportunity for lots of interest, including all of us in the room, to come together and focus on the need to cut consumption and prevent waste in the first place. So from the local government perspective, this programmatic focus on preventing clothing waste from entering both the disposal and the recycling and reuse streams can intersect with and result in other environmental, economic, and social benefits, such as reduction in energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions, conservation of natural resources, reduction in pesticides and toxics, increase in jobs or economic development, community building and a sense of social connection and human well-being, increasing residents' financial security, and increasing equity through fair trade and non-sweatshop labor. So with all of that as background, I'm finally going to ask, what exactly is clothing waste prevention? So for King County and Seattle's purposes, they've chosen to focus on consumer practices instead of preventing waste at, say, the manufacturer or retail level. So examples of clothing waste prevention include the following. Buying only the clothing you need and buying clothes that last, like the REI clothes I mentioned earlier that I still own. End of life, extend the life of your clothing, and we have a number of examples. Caring for your clothing. These are all pretty intuitive, I think. Repairing, repurposing, refashioning clothes or buying refashioned clothes, renting or leasing clothes, sharing through informal networks, and reusing clothes secondhand. And we're going to hear a lot of those examples throughout the rest of today. So to better understand the lay of the land, our team with Seattle and King County undertook a research effort to further identify and explore existing models within the fashion industry, and also to identify consumer research and programs conducted by governments, NGOs, and academia. So emphasis was placed on retail and consumer action, so not at end-of-life donation, not upstream at the manufacturers, that primarily promote less clothing consumption, clothing longevity, care, repair, sharing, and repurposing. And resale and reuse of as-is clothing was intentionally excluded, since there's already a great infrastructure for that. Okay, so for the next few minutes, what I'm going to do is highlight a few of the findings from all of those topics. And they may be of more or less interest to you depending on your exact relationship to the clothing economy. So I'm thinking of it as kind of a sale rack where everything looks great, but it may not be in your size. So take what you're interested in, and that can be your take-home message. So let's begin with industry efforts. Great. So Patagonia has gained a lot of notoriety for encouraging its customers to buy less of their product. They offer do-it-yourself repair guides, as well as a robust repair service. I think they employ more sewists than just about anybody in the country. They refurbish and sell a so-called worn wear line of product. Eileen Fisher, who we're going to hear more from later today, is truly remarkable, I think, in their multi-tiered model focusing on repair, reuse, and upcycling. And Run the Runway, they're a self-declared, the first and only closet in the cloud, they call themselves. And this model is interesting because it's really utilizing sharing economy principles, including non-ownership, time shifting, and broad access. But it's also at this point where we really intersect with the line of inquiry that asks whether such disrupting sharing economies are really good for the environment or not. I think that's an open question. And also at this point, I really want to underscore that a lot of the brands on the leading edge of clothing waste prevention, they're simply not economically accessible to much of the population, simply because the products are too expensive or are for sale in higher-end markets. So I think that's kind of an important social frame to put around a lot of this. So now we're going to look at the industry and association and entrepreneurial efforts that we dug into a little more deeply. The Sustainable Apparel Coalition, they're the apparel, footwear, and home textile industry's foremost alliance for sustainable production. That's their self-defined moniker. And of interest to today's discussion, I think, is what they call their HIG index of environmental brand modules. You can think of them as LCAs that look at various aspects of clothing production, and they actually have a sub-module for care and repair. And you can find that on their website. The Renewal Workshop, truly remarkable model. We'll hear more about them today, or from them. Sword and Plow, they repurpose military surplus materials into clothing and accessories. They limit their color and their style selections, and they manufacture only in the United States. In part, they claim to limit their carbon intensity. So that's their approach. Cayucci, they offer a linen leasing service, and basically they take back your used linens and then find if there are options for reuse or renewal or upcycling. And then Mud Jeans has a leasing service as well. You can lease up to 3 pairs at once. There's an initial one-time membership fee, and then there's a monthly fee to have those in your closet. And as they put it, it's cool not to be the owner of your jeans. Lots going on at the community level and government and NGOs. King County, of course, has their eco-consumer repair events that are gaining in popularity here and nationally. The Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, is there anybody here from DEQ? Okay. They have an amazing, what do they call it? Their strategic plan for reuse, repair, and extending the lifespan of products in Oregon. And it's an amazingly thorough deep dive. It's available on the website, exploring a lot of options for waste prevention. And they do have a specific focus on apparel. And the report actually offers 18 detailed specific actions on clothing waste prevention in the textile and clothing sector. DEQ then went on to create a comprehensive outreach campaign called Make Every Thread Count that they've made available to local governments. The Seattle Clothing Exchange is a long-time Seattle institution. It's a clothing swap model. And then WRAP, which stands for Waste and Resources Action Program out of the UK. I believe their effort represents probably the most comprehensive work toward driving down textile waste from both producers and consumers. They look at the whole gamut. And they have this amazing campaign called Love Your Clothes. It crosses the UK and Europe and looks at a variety of approaches toward clothing waste prevention. They're really creative, a lot of fun. And they're also doing a lot of primary research into behaviors and demographics. So they're just a wealth of information. You can spend days on their website. So next, to further inform our understanding of clothing waste prevention, our team spoke to a broad group of public, private, and not-for-profit organizations, each of which had their own varied definitions of and ways to approach clothing waste prevention. It's not really a defined term yet. So just running through these quickly, the California Product Stewardship Council, Eileen Fisher, who we'll hear from later today, Goodwill, they were a key partner in Thread Cycle and had a lot of great information to share on clothing waste prevention. One Earth, they're a remarkable nonprofit. They call themselves a Think and Do Tank based out of Vancouver, Canada. And their mission is to transform production and consumption patterns locally, nationally, and internationally to be sustainable, healthy, and just. So they're worth checking out too. That's One Earth. The Renewal Workshop we get to hear from. Savers and Value Village were a great Thread Cycle partner, and they too gave the for-profit perspective from the thrift side. Seattle Good Business Network we'll hear from today. We had great conversations with them. Many of you have probably heard of the viral sensation, The Story of Stuff, and we've engaged them and spoken to the executive director there. And finally, the World Resources Institute, a great global research organization. Their self-defined term big ideas into action at the nexus of environment, economic opportunity, and well-being. And interestingly, they've been at the forefront of developing international metrics around food waste, and now they're also doing a deep dive into textiles and have already engaged a lot of major corporations on that. So they're an interesting group that we engaged as well. Okay, so now what I want to do in kind of the last segment of this is to turn toward digesting all the information we gathered. We talked to all these organizations, all these amazing people, and then we tried to figure out what patterns emerged from that. And we identified 5 emerging themes: profit and scalability, segmentation, inclusivity and intersectionality, economic development and policy, and metrics. So what I'm going to do for these next 5 slides is give you some guiding questions that emerge that we feel, while they are questions, they kind of show you the frame that we're exploring within each of these segments. And then I'm going to share some of the detailed comments that we got from all of the stakeholders we talked to, just to kind of animate those questions and these themes. So let's begin with profit and scalability. How does clothing waste prevention impact businesses' bottom line? How can waste prevention approaches be scaled from pilot to broad implementation? And what makes an approach scalable? So here are some of the comments we heard from all of those various groups I just outlined for you. Customers are busy. They may or they may not pay attention to in-store messaging or pop-up repair events at boutique locations. Upcycling, it's expensive, but it's also a real business opportunity. Repair and resale shops, they're hard to scale because each item must be treated as unique. What does it look like to scale the sharing economy? How do we develop revenue-generating business models that drive toward waste prevention and simultaneously attract business interest and profit? And finally, one national chain shared with us they're testing paid repair services at their stores. Moving on to segmentation. How are audiences targeted and selected for clothing waste prevention outreach or sales for that matter? What demographic information is leveraged? What specific behaviors are being addressed? There we go. What specific behaviors are being addressed? So, some of the comments we heard. Shoppers, they're treasure hunters. Savings and convenience will always override sustainability. Focusing clothing waste prevention efforts on consumer clothing may not be the easiest start. We recommend looking at industrial uniform companies. And we can borrow important lessons learned from food waste issues to message and promote clothing waste prevention approaches. And indeed, that's something our team is already thinking about. Inclusivity and intersectionality. How are different groups affected by clothing waste prevention differentially? How do we ensure all perspectives, including social and economic concerns, are equitably addressed and included in the conversation? Ahead of myself. So, some of the comments. There are not currently enough sewists, nor is there sufficient training to create more skilled labor for repair workshops. We need to look at intersectionality of ethnicity, low-income populations, sewing, upcycling, and business generation. And finally on this one, well-being is a focus of the Eileen Fisher LifeWork program workshops, but few others are making the connection between well-being and sustainable clothing consumption behavior. Now, I will say that One Earth and WRI are looking at that fascinating intersection of well-being and clothing waste prevention, but a lot of entities aren't. Okay, two more of these theme slides, economic development and policy. What policy, legal, or financial tools can be leveraged to support clothing waste prevention? Sorry, getting ahead of myself again. So, some of the things we heard. Policy frameworks like extended producer responsibility will likely be necessary to level the playing field and foster brand innovation around clothing waste prevention. There are not currently people waiting to get sewist jobs. Training is needed with support from economic development organizations. We've heard a lot of calls for training. And finally, on this one, if cities do too much to address this issue, multi-billion-dollar brands will get off without having to make an effort or a commitment. I thought that was fascinating. Metrics. How do we measure clothing waste prevention? How do we measure success and or create metrics to hold participants accountable? So with metrics, some of the things we heard, there's a need to measure cultural change, engagement, hard metrics, and process outcomes. Metrics and universal definitions are needed to evaluate sharing models, renting subscriptions, etc. How can the sharing economy be structured to actually impart environmental benefits? And finally, what metrics can successfully evaluate the benefits of reduced consumption or extended life in clothes? So hopefully that helps to give a bit of a smattering of the actual comments we heard from all the stakeholders we spoke to and bring some of their voices into the room. So wrapping up, the big questions for us are, what is our most potent role as local governments? What's our biggest lever for change in what's truly an international issue? So there are really unique changes to clothing waste prevention that may be more difficult to tackle than some other commodities. Apparel, it's a truly global industry, as we saw. The products are deeply personal, and they're tied to cultural and individual identity. That makes, more so than the aluminum can that you're about to recycle. We feel deeply about the clothes and other apparel and textiles that cross through our lives. So as we chart a path forward, we're currently exploring a few parallel paths around purchasing decisions, such as buying only what you need, and use phase activities, such as wearing, caring, sharing, and repairing. And so, yes, we do have more questions than answers right now, so we're further exploring the following questions. Is it better to join a program or create a new one? Which partners allow the greatest opportunity to leverage change? Who are the unlikely partners to bring into the conversation? Would it be useful to reframe the whole clothing waste prevention conversation? And what metrics do we create and track? So hopefully that gives you an overview of what's happening in the world with clothing waste prevention and a bit of what we're working on ourselves. And with some amazing presentations still ahead of us today, what I want to do is leave you with one final thought. Not that one. That was one last criteria. What do we use to measure success? The thought I want to leave you with is it better to change your mind than to change your clothes? So really appreciate your time and your attention to what we've been up to. You can get more resources here. Talk to Chris or Liz, who are here in the front row, or myself. We've got some information online, and I think all these slides are available as PDF following the presentation. So thank you guys so much. Oh, right. And the best part, time for questions.
Well,
yeah.
Maybe one.
Oh, maybe one. Okay. I might let you squeeze in two. Questions? Comments? Yeah.
I run the repair cafes for Clark County, and as you were talking, I was just wondering about the difference between the environmental impact of the sewing and those projects versus the other things that repair events repair. I'm wondering if you knew, if I'm going to go focus on one or the other, which one I should.
Oh, gotcha. Right. Tom Watson may have some data on that because he's been so involved in the repair event. So as I understand it, the question is, are you going to be repairing textiles and clothing at those events, or the lawnmowers and other things that come in terms of environmental impact? And since I know we're limited on time, I don't personally know if LCAs or other things have been done on that, but one of my favorite quotes from the DEQ, Oregon Department of Environmental Quality report, was that they get a particular kick out of the fact that they often repair sewing machines at those events, because then you're repairing a repair tool, and they feel like you're getting even more leverage out of that.